A building doesn't just fall, it shatters. A life doesn't just end, it echoes. And a nation doesn't just break, it can be reborn. We tend to think of history as this grand story, written by victors and visionaries. But what if the most profound changes, the revolutions that toppled empires, the ideas that redefined humanity weren't born from triumph but from tragedy? What if a single catastrophic earthquake could shatter more than just buildings? What if it could shatter a corrupt government and spark a democratic revolution? This isn't some what-if scenario. This is history. From natural disasters that give birth to new countries, to single assassinations that topple ancient republics, these are the stories of how tragedy reshaped our world. The morning of November 1st, 1755, didn't begin with a tremor. It began with a deafening roar that seemed to claw its way up from the bowels of the earth. In Lisbon, one of Europe's richest and most devout cities, thousands were packed into towering cathedrals for All Saints' Day Mass. In an instant, their prayers were answered with annihilation. The ground buckled, and centuries-old stone churches collapsed, crushing the faithful inside. Those who survived and fled to the open squares watched in horror as a new monster rose from the sea, a colossal tsunami that swallowed the harbor and the lower city. And what the quake and the water didn't destroy, fire did. Toppled candles from the church altars ignited a firestorm that raged for days. This wasn't just the death of a city, it was the birth of a new world. Before 1755, the world had a simple explanation for this kind of horror. It was the wrath of God. The dominant philosophy of the time, known as optimism, argued that everything happened for a reason, as part of a divine plan, in the best of all possible worlds. But as news of Lisbon's total destruction spread, that certainty began to crack. Philosophers like Voltaire were incensed. Why would a loving God obliterate one of the most Catholic cities in Europe on a holy day, leveling churches while, as rumor had it, sparing the city's red light district? It just didn't make any sense. The official response from Portugal's government was shockingly practical. The king's chief minister, the Marquis de Pombal, famously declared the duty of the hour was to bury the dead and feed the living. No prayers, no searching for divine meaning. Instead, he organized relief efforts, sent the army to prevent looting, and, in a stroke of genius, pioneered one of the world's first large-scale projects for earthquake-resistant buildings to reconstruct the city. He also sent a questionnaire to every parish in the country, asking for detailed accounts of the quake, what time it hit, how long it lasted, what direction the ground shook. It was the birth of modern seismology, an attempt to understand the disaster not as an act of God but as a natural phenomenon. The Lisbon earthquake didn't just topple buildings, it toppled an entire worldview. It exposed the failure of religious dogma to explain the raw power of nature and became a rallying cry for the Enlightenment, a movement that championed reason and science over superstition. The rubble of Lisbon became the foundation for a more secular, more scientific modern world. Over 200 years later, on the other side of the Atlantic, the earth would speak again. At 7:17 a.m. on September 19th, 1985, an 8-magnitude earthquake slammed Mexico City. For decades, Mexico had been under the thumb of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI, a one-party state whose power seemed absolute. But its foundations were riddled with corruption. When the quake hit, those foundations crumbled. Hundreds of buildings, many built with shoddy materials and fraudulent permits, collapsed into dust, including schools and hospitals. The government's response was a catastrophic failure. President Miguel de la Madrid initially refused international aid and downplayed the disaster's scale. The military, instead of helping, just cordoned off areas, leaving thousands of people trapped in the rubble to die. But then, something extraordinary happened. As the government stood by, the people rose up. Ordinary citizens, students, factory workers, housewives poured into the streets. They formed their own rescue brigades, digging through debris with their bare hands, pulling neighbors from the wreckage. They organized soup kitchens and shelters, creating a parallel government run by the people themselves. These spontaneous citizen groups grew into a powerful new political force. For the first time, a real civil society emerged to challenge the PRI's grip on power. The 1985 earthquake didn't just reveal the government's corruption, it proved that the people were stronger. It lit the fuse for a democratic movement that would, in the coming years, culminate in the end of 71 years of one-party rule. It's amazing how a single moment of geological violence can expose the hidden fault lines in a society and unleash a force for change that nobody saw coming. Uncovering these unseen connections in history is what we're all about. If you're fascinated by them too, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you these kinds of stories. Some tragedies aren't acts of nature but acts of men who believe they're saving the world, only to end up destroying it. By 44 BCE, the Roman Republic was a ghost of its former self. Ravaged by a century of civil wars, political gridlock and rampant inequality, its democratic institutions were failing. Into this void stepped one man, Julius Caesar. A brilliant general and a masterful politician, he'd just been declared dictator perpetuo dictator for life. To many senators, this was the final nail in the Republic's coffin. They feared he wanted to be a king, a title the Romans absolutely despised. Led by figures like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a group of senators calling themselves the Liberators hatched a plan. They truly believed that by killing one man, they could restore the Republic to its former glory. On the Ides of March, they surrounded Caesar in the Senate and stabbed him 23 times. Brutus was reportedly ready to give a grand speech celebrating the return of liberty. He never got the chance. The people of Rome weren't grateful. They were furious. They had benefited from Caesar's reforms and saw his murder not as liberation, but as a selfish act by a corrupt aristocracy. The assassination didn't restore the Republic. It just created a power vacuum that plunged Rome into another 13 years of brutal civil war. The conspirators' plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of saving the Republic, their actions proved its institutions were too broken to be saved. The power struggle that followed could only end with one man in absolute control. That man was Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. After defeating his rivals, he would take a new name, Augustus, and become Rome's very first emperor. The tragedy of Caesar's death wasn't that it killed a man, but that the attempt to save a republic guaranteed the birth of an empire. Sometimes, though, a political assassination can do the exact opposite, becoming the catalyst that achieves what the victim couldn't in life. In 1963, America was a nation at war with itself. The civil rights movement was fighting to dismantle segregation, but it was being met with fierce, violent resistance. President John F. Kennedy, though sympathetic to the cause, was playing it safe. He had introduced a landmark civil rights bill, but it was hopelessly stalled in Congress, held hostage by powerful Southern Democrats who were determined to kill it. Kennedy, ever the cautious politician, feared losing their support and risking his entire agenda. Then, on November 22, 1963, shots rang out in Dallas. The assassination of President Kennedy sent a tidal wave of shock and grief across the nation and the world. In that single moment of national trauma, the entire political calculus shifted. Kennedy's successor, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, was a Southerner and a master of getting things done in Washington. Addressing a grieving Congress just days after the assassination, Johnson made a powerful declaration. No memorial oration or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long. Suddenly, the bill was no longer just a piece of legislation. It was a moral testament to a fallen leader. LBJ used his immense political skill and the emotional weight of the moment to shatter the congressional deadlock. He pressured, cajoled, and outmaneuvered the bill's opponents. The assassination had created immense moral pressure for action, mobilizing church groups and giving political cover to moderate Republicans whose votes were crucial. On July 2, 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, officially ending segregation and outlawing discrimination. A national tragedy, the murder of a president, became the unexpected political force that passed one of the greatest social reforms in American history. History isn't a straight line. It's a chaotic, often violent, and totally unpredictable force. As we've seen, the very ground beneath our feet and the ideas in our heads can be shattered in an instant. A cyclone's devastation in 1970, combined with a callous government response, became a major catalyst for the Bangladesh Liberation War and the birth of a new nation. A catastrophic earthquake exposed the lies of a corrupt regime in Mexico and gave birth to a democratic movement. The knife meant to save a republic ensured its demise, and the bullet that took a president's life achieved his most important legacy. These tragedies are crucibles. They burn away the trivial, expose the fatal weaknesses in our societies, and force a reckoning. They reveal that the world we live in today wasn't just built on triumphs and innovations, but was also forged in the fires of catastrophe. The rubble of the old world, it turns out, often becomes the foundation of the new. But that's just a few examples, and history is a massive conversation. What other tragedies do you think had a huge, world-altering impact? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through history's turning points, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.